But I want to talk a little bit about Kuhn's lens relative to the why of what it is that we are doing in New York State, because I fear that that is getting lost sometimes in the politics of the day. Kuhn talked about the laws of science as dictating our course, dictating our practice as we move forward relative to the particular fields that we're engaged in. And he said along the way we will come across anomalies that can't be explained by the laws of science at that time. And again, the laws of science very much equate to the laws under which the education sector functions. Kuhn also said there comes a time when there are too many anomalies that cannot be explained by the law, and the result is that we have to then change our laws accordingly. This is called, as many of you are aware, a paradigm shift. And Kuhn is the one who originated that word, and the more that you look into how he described it, you'll understand why the term has carried forward for so long. We could argue, and we do, it is the impetus for the work that we at the department are doing. It is the impetus for the urgency with which we're doing this work, and really the vigor and the rigor that we're doing this work. And I want to point out some of the anomalies just as a reminder for why it is that we're doing this. First, on Tuesday, I spoke to you about our graduation rates, 74%. You've all heard, John, myself, Ken may have mentioned this yesterday, the 74% graduation rate, despite the fact that along the way that we were increasing the standards, that we increased the number of tests, the scores on the tests that the students had to achieve, and we also took away one of the critical diplomas, the local diploma for general education students, that when we made that announcement, the rhetoric that came with that was that the sky will in fact fall on graduation rates. Guess what? It did not. Graduation rates continued to go up. We continued to see more students with disabilities graduating themselves with a local diploma or a Regents diploma. We continued as educators and as an education sector to meet the bar despite the fact that the state was continuing to increase it. But all the while, the rest of the world was starting to wake up and speed up. And although we were on a northeast trajectory in improving our graduation rates, the rest of the world was on a much steeper northeast trajectory. So that was but one of the anomalies. And then when we looked deeper into that graduation rate, we saw that about half of those students graduating were meeting our initial metric for college and career readiness. And that metric was relatively simple in that it was either a 75 on the ELA Regents or an 80 on the math Regents, or a student who had achieved the Regents diploma with advanced designation. Roughly half of our graduating class were meeting those metrics. What was more troubling, that as we dug into that 35% for our black and brown boys, that number dropped into single digits. As we looked at our subgroups in particular, our most disadvantaged subgroups, we were in the single digits in the teens. We saw anomalies that the current laws, the current regulations could no longer explain away. When we look a little bit deeper, we see, for example, that those kids that are graduating and moving on are facing an increasing likelihood that they will be taking a remediation course in college. Now, some argued this week, but we need a degree of remediation within our two-year schools in particular for those adult learners who are returning. I don't dispute that at all. That's actually a good thing to have in place. Unfortunately, the data tells us that the story is not so great. When we look at the latest OECD report and we see that the adult skills are lagging relative to what's needed, not just in New York State, not just in the United States, but as we look at ourselves competitively on the 21st century global stage, we are lagging behind. So we look at our student progress, we look at the NAEP scores, we see that again we are relatively flat. More data points that say we are increasing the anomalies that can no longer be explained by the current paradigm, by our current laws, regulations, and guidelines that say 22 credits, 5 Regents exams at 65. So what do we do about this? Our response, as you know, when we look back at Heifetz, has been too often to look for a technical answer. We want an easy answer. We want a guideline that says, if you do this, your students will respond this way and all will be well again. We want to be able to say that, well, for those students, they will make it through. We will continue to excel in our teaching, and whether they choose college, career, or the military, there is really no crisis, and this is something, as we've been accused, that the department is manufacturing this crisis. Let's take a look then at the military, and let's take a look at the fact that 75% of those students who want access to the military cannot access it. You know what the leading reason why they can't access the military is? They can't pass the entrance exam that is based in literacy and mathematics. We have an economic issue, we have a citizenship issue, and we have a military issue, national security. This is not manufacturing a crisis, folks. The data is telling us what the data is telling us. And so we have to take a look at our paradigm, and that's something that we have done. And I want to talk about that on a personal note for just a moment. Yesterday I wasn't able to be here because I spent the day in various cardiologist offices with my wife, who 12 years ago went into cardiac arrest 3 times. And as this was happening, all we wanted as a family was a technical answer. Give her a pill. Give her some type of therapy that will make this stop, that will make her heart be well again, so that we can continue on our lifestyle in a predictable and comfortable way. It took us 30 days in the hospital to find a solution 12 years ago. And it came in combination of pharmaceuticals and a pacemaker defibrillator. 30 days in which she went in and out of consciousness. Okay? There was not a technical solution for that. 12 years later, her defibrillator is going off with more frequency, and we don't know why. We want a technical answer. We want it to stop. We want it to be comfortable again, to go back to how we were living. We will spend the better part of next week in the hospital, where the doctors and the folks that study this at Albany Med will again come up with an adaptive response, because there is no technical answer to what she's going through. So and my daughter is very angry about this, by the way. She wants the doctors held accountable. How can they be so incompetent that they don't have an answer for her right now? Because what she's presenting is different than what the laws dictate. There are anomalies that the laws can't explain. It's time for a new paradigm. We don't know what the paradigm will look like. We have a sense that it's going to be a combination of pharmaceuticals and perhaps adjustment to that device. So bring it back to our sector. It is time for a new paradigm. And what does that paradigm look like? It looks like higher expectations as articulated by the Common Core standards. It looks like a new and better way to measure reaching those standards through our assessments. More writing, more reading, more conceptual understanding, more ability to go back to the text and justify reason. In other words, we are assessing based on the skills that the students need to know and be able to do as they go out onto the 21st century stage. We take a look at the tools, the resources, and training that we've always had and realize that they are no longer enough. The state has never sponsored a series of trainings like this as we have over the last 2.5 years. We need data systems that give us information in timely fashion that we can act on, not at the end of the year, but the next day, so that we don't lose a moment in educating our students towards the standards that the Common Core dictates. We need to make sure that every teacher in front of our classroom is as good as they can be. We can no longer accept studies like the one that came out this week from IES that says our most disadvantaged students are not getting the best teachers. We can no longer accept that. It is yet another anomaly that says the current laws no longer hold true. But we cannot see this as a criticism. We have to see this as an invitation to adapt. Every NTI that we've had, I've issued the same challenge. Set aside your current expertise and become a learner for 2 days, 3 days, 5 days. so that when you go back, you can help institute, you can lead the institution of this paradigm shift. That's the work that you've done this week. That's the work that you've done as John and I visit your classrooms and we see it happening. And yet our fear is that too much of this is being lost in the politics of the day. The anomalies, folks, continue. We've seen them, we know them. We have to make the adjustment under this new paradigm. We have to bring forward these new tools. We have to adapt in our practices. And in doing so, there are some things that I am very hopeful about. First, I'm hopeful that everyone understands that our call for teaching as the core truly is the keystone of this paradigm. The research is unequivocal about this. But for teaching to be the keystone of this paradigm, we have to understand what the teaching needs to look like relative to the demands of the Common Core. We've given you video examples of what that looks like, and we know folks are paying attention to those. We know folks are studying the standards. We know you're doing the work that you've done this week, not just here, but at home. And how do we know that? The evidence speaks for itself because we are seeing it in your classrooms. And so we are hopeful that we will continue to see this, that when you go back, you will set aside the politics. You will talk about what you've learned this week. You will talk about the conflicts that you've had that you can't yet understand or explain, and you will utilize your colleagues to be better at what you do. You will help shift the paradigm based on the fact that there are too many anomalies today. We are hopeful that when you go back, you not only will receive protection, direction, and order, but that you will provide protection, direction, and order to your colleagues. It is not enough for us to say, you will be okay. We've done this before. Maybe not at this scale, maybe not at this speed, but it is what is dictated by the needs of our students and their future, not our past. Their future, not our past. Two different paradigms because of what's needed when these students leave us. We are hopeful that the growth mindset that you have displayed here this week, that you display when we are out in your regions, in your districts, in your schools, in your classrooms, that you will pass that on. Those who don't believe that we need a paradigm shift, I would argue and forcefully that they are still in a fixed mindset. That's problematic, and every one of us should be challenging that. We are hopeful that as you go back and you look deeper at the modules that Kate will talk about in a moment, that you will understand that they are but a resource for you. And right now, they're a critical resource because we're in the midst of this paradigm shift. You will get better at using those. Your colleagues will get better at using those. You will balance them against other resources. You will do what educators do. You will find the best resources to build the best lessons relative to what your students need at that time to be successful in reaching the standards. And we are hopeful that you will understand as you move forward the need for these changes, the need for this paradigm shift, and in doing so, we are thankful, as Commissioner started the week with, we are thankful for a number of things this week. Thankful for the work that you do, the work that you lead. Thankful to Jeff Cannell, Tom Ruler, and their team at Cultural Ed for hosting us this week. Thankful to Ken Wagner, Mary Cahill, and the curriculum team for building so much of the resources that you have in front of you. Thankful to Kate Gerson and her team for supporting Ken and the work that he's doing, the work that his team is doing. We are thankful for the vendor community that is with us, Common Core Inc., Core Knowledge, PCG, Expeditionary Learning, the partnership that they've formed with us in putting this work forward, the partnership they've formed with you in making this work. We are incredibly thankful for that. Thankful to Don Geron, Mary Gerons, and their team for pulling this all together logistically and otherwise. And again, most thankful for the fact that you all understand that to make this paradigm shift effective, we all have to claim that teaching is the core. We all have to live that teaching is the core. This paradigm, the keystone of which is a strong, effective teacher in front of every student is the shift that we all have to make, and it is the shift that is most important for their future, not our past. Thank you so much for the work that you do, the work that you're going to do, participating in this paradigm shift.